Hi, everyone. I'm Jeanette Mulvey, the editor-in-chief of Co. by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to our fifth episode of Start, Run, Grow. So today we're talking to business owners and experts about their best practices for hiring and retaining employees in this very challenging workforce shortage. Throughout the program, you can ask questions of our speakers by typing them into the panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Now, before we get started, I'd like to thank today's sponsor, Salary.com, and of course, our series sponsors, Dell, FedEx, Iron Mountain, MetLife, and Oracle NetSuite. We appreciate your continued partnership in this series. Now, let's get started. We'll begin with our start session. All right, so we are here with Traci Tapani. She is the owner and co-president of Wyoming Machine. Now, Wyoming Machine is a sheet metal fabricator based in Minnesota, and Traci has a lot of interesting stories and advice about how they are hiring and finding new talent, and of course, how she's managing at the same time to foster engagement and continue to grow her existing team, which is really just as important. So hi, Traci. Welcome. Thank you so much.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here today.
Yes, thank you so much. So just first, tell us about Wyoming Machine. What do you do? How long have you been in business? How many employees do you have?
Wyoming Machine started in 1974. My dad actually started the company. So in a few years from now, I think we'll be coming up on our 50th anniversary, which is a long time for a family-owned small business. I am second generation owner. I share the presidency at Wyoming Machine with my sister, Lori. People often ask, how does that work? And that's a long story, but Lori and I are only 13 months apart in age. And when we were deciding how to run the company, I'm the younger, and I told her that she was not going to be the boss of me. And so we decided that we would share the presidency in the company. Our customers are primarily original equipment manufacturers who are building some type of equipment, and we are building custom sheet metal components for the equipment.
And how many employees do you have?
We have just over 50 employees right now.
And are you actively hiring right now?
We are actively hiring. This is a difficult employment market. Many people know that in the manufacturing industry, we have been experiencing skills shortage for more than a decade. But the COVID crisis, I think, has only made the problem worse than it was before. So something we've been dealing with for a long time, and it's only gotten worse in the last couple of years.
Yeah. Okay. So walk us through this, the nuts and bolts. No sheet metal pun intended. But the process of hiring. When you need to hire a new employee, what is your first step? Do you place an ad, or do you do that through a recruiter or an agency? Can you tell us about that?
Sure. I think really the strategy for how we recruit and hire people has changed over time. And I think it's going to continue to change because it really depends on the labor market, and adjustments are needed depending on who's available in the market and, how low unemployment is. At the present time, the first place that I'm going to start when I need to hire somebody is I am going to reach out to a talent agency. That has not always been the case at Wyoming Machine, but it's what we're currently doing. We are also often posting ads on Indeed and then using local word of mouth to try to find the candidates that we're looking for.
So what made you decide to make that switch to using a third-party agency?
Yeah, so, the switch to the third party agency is really driven by a couple of things from my perspective. The first is those agencies have trained recruiters who are making phone calls, trying to identify people in the market that are either interested in looking for a job or maybe just coming straight out of a trade school and haven't quite figured out the steps needed to take the first step to finding a position that they're interested in. So I like the fact that they have recruiters that are actively calling and trying to engage people all of the time. And as a small business owner, we don't have the resources to have people here who can spend days calling people trying to find candidates. Secondly, I would say that having a talent agency in the mix helps to speed up the hiring process. In this current labor market, we have to act quickly when candidates become available. And just like we're experiencing a worker shortage in manufacturing, and many other industries are experiencing that same thing, we all know that healthcare is experiencing challenges with staffing. And so we're finding that it takes longer and longer to get people scheduled for pre-employment health screenings and physicals. And any delay in the process right now like that can mean, that we lose somebody that we might otherwise want. And talent agencies have already screened the candidates and done what they need to. So if I interview them, I could have them in my shop within a day if
Oh,
I want to
that's so
hire those
interesting.
people.
Right. So they've already done a lot of that pre-work before you're ready to make an offer. So you don't have to do that. That's so interesting. So when you're looking for a candidate, I think we all, no matter what business you're in, you sort of need two things in a candidate. You need a person who either knows how to do the tasks and the skills required to do a job today, and you also need that person to be able to evolve and learn and change as technology changes or as your business needs change. So how do you balance those two things when you are looking for an employee for your company, like the actual skill set versus finding someone who will be able to learn and grow?
Yeah. I think over time I have thought a lot about and experimented and practiced with trying to ask questions or read someone's resume to assess skills that I wasn't necessarily aware of before. So, for example, you said, who can I train on the job? Who can continue to learn? Over the years, I've come to realize I look for opportunities where people are learning as a normal part of their life. So, whether that's through just hobbies that they have, like they picked up a new hobby, maybe it's knitting, maybe it's golfing, and they had to learn how to do that. And so I'm trying to find ways to assess, is this person ready to learn? Is learning a normal part of their day-to-day life? And if I can find that in a person, that often leads me to believe that on the job, they're going to be ready to learn and they're already in the mode of learning. Some people get stuck and they don't have learning as part of their normal everyday life. But when I can see that on a resume, or I can bring that out during an interview, it gives me a lot more confidence that they can be a continuous learner on the job, which is critically important, I think, in almost any profession, because technology in the world is changing so fast right now that lifelong learning is really a key skill.
I think that's so interesting because I bet the vast majority of job hunters would never think to include those kinds of hobbies on their resume, or even like bring it up in conversation in an interview. So that's really interesting. And even a lot of small businesses who are hiring would not think to ask about those things. So I love that advice. Let's before before we go to audience questions, but audience, go ahead and type your questions in. We're talking about hiring, but of course you already have 50 people working for you, and it's important that those people are feeling engaged and happy and satisfied and loyal to you, because of course other people are probably trying to hire them. So can you talk about what you've been doing on that front during this labor shortage?
Sure. One of the things that was a shift for me during the pandemic itself, I mean, we had a lot of safety protocols that we were dealing with on the shop floor. As a business that was designated as essential, we had to come here to the office and out in the plant every single day. I know not all businesses did that, but I really engaged in spending a lot more time out on the shop floor with the people that are working there. And really forming, I think, stronger bonds between myself and the people that work in production, so that we've become closer. I think they trust me probably a lot more maybe than they did 5 years ago, because they know who I am. They know that they could tell me virtually anything as far as troubles they're having at work, things they wish that were happening, what's frustrating to them. And that kind of dialogue, I think, has given me the opportunity as the owner to fix those problems, to do the best that I can to create a work environment that's keeping most people generally very happy. And I think that close contact with an owner matters to my people. I also have been very proactive in adjusting people's wages during this time. So if I have to hire somebody and I end up hiring somebody new at a wage that I have not hired somebody at previously, or I kind of, anybody's going to look at, if I have 5 welders or 10 welders or how many ever I have, who's the best welder I have. They're probably going to make more than the least skilled welder that I have. And I've tried to maintain that sort of parity between people. So if I hire somebody at a higher wage rate than we typically would, everybody else in the department proactively is going to get an adjustment so that they stay as the highest wage earner because their skill and length of service here warrants that. And I think that because people know that I'm doing that and they can trust me to do that, there's less sort of, background noise and reason to go look someplace else because they know that I'm trying to be proactive about that.
Yeah, so that's
and they know that I'm open to discussing it.
Yeah, so it's such an interesting point, right? Because if you have to hire people at a higher salary, a lot of times employers don't look at the people that they already have and say, well, we have to adjust their salaries as well. You're a small bit, 50 employees is a lot of employees, but technically you still qualify as a small business. And how do you connect with your community, and how do you use that as a way to recruit employees?
So we maintain close relationships in the community through a variety of community involvement. Local technical training schools are partners of ours, and we have close partnerships. So they know that if they have students that are looking for internships that relate to manufacturing or who are graduating from programs, they sometimes refer people to us. We have a similar situation with a local high school. We have a high school here in Minnesota that has a program where students are leaving their school during the day and getting credits to go to work, on the job training as part of their curriculum. In the past, manufacturing wouldn't have been a possibility for those students because generally you have to be 18 years of age or older to work in a manufacturing environment because of workers' compensation rules. Minnesota has made some changes to our program so that we can have people under 18 working here, but it's given high school students exposure to what it's like to work in a manufacturing environment, as well as doing a lot of other, just really involvement in all kinds of things related to workforce shortages, worker training, diversifying in our industry, and our involvement in all those has linked us up with people who can make referrals to us. So we're well known in the community. And we're also well known in our community from a cultural standpoint as being a place who's willing to train people, be flexible with people. So if it's a woman who, any family member really, but we most often see it with females who are underrepresented in our industry anyway, that maybe they need to have adjusted hours so that they can deal with family daycare issues. And people know that this is a place that I'd be willing to make adjustments in your work schedule to make the job work for you if you're ready and able to work.
Yeah, so you've touched on something that actually addresses one of the questions from the audience. So I'm going to ask you that now. They're essentially saying if there's already a shortage of workers in this worker pool, and now you need people with special skills for your particular business, how do you even find them in such a small pool? And you mentioned training, so can you talk about that? Like, how willing are you guys to take people who maybe don't really know exactly how to do what you need, but can be trained?
Okay, so I can give you an example of that right now. We are just recruiting for a new quality inspector in the company, and we already have some people in the role, but we need an additional person. And I know that it's going to be very difficult for me to find someone who's already been working in a quality department doing quality inspection. But I also know that in manufacturing, people who work on the production floor often do their own inspections, or they do in quality checks on their coworkers, jobs. And it's not just people in the final inspection office. And so when I was working with the talent agency, I made it very clear to them. I kind of try to promote my own job, like what I could offer somebody that they might not get elsewhere. So if you're a person who's currently working in production, but you would like to move into a new role as a quality inspector, as long as you can demonstrate to us that you know how to use the tools that we would use to measure things, I am willing to train you on the rest of what it means to work in the quality department. But I have to have somebody that can measure a part. And if I can find that, we will help you get to the next level and give you an opportunity to move into a quality role. And so I think that makes that kind of job more attractive to someone who may not have seen a pathway into a quality inspector role otherwise.
Yeah, so it sounds like I think what you're saying, but if I'm wrong, correct me. It sounds like you're saying that for each role, you're kind of identifying like a few core skills that are must-haves. And then if the person has that, then you can work with them on training them for the rest.
Yes. And, in things in the past, for example, even we had very set work schedules for everything. But as I've looked at it over the years, I don't have to have everyone here starting at 5 a.m. and working till 3:30. Somebody could start at 6, somebody could start at 7. Recently, a machinist, which is an incredibly difficult position to fill right now, I worked with the talent agencies and said, you know what, I'd take 2 part-time people and bring them together to create a full-time person if there was an older worker, maybe who was kind of getting ready to exit the workforce or had exited but would still like to work a few hours. I did that with a welder here who recently retired a few weeks ago, and we needed extra help. The welder is now back at work, and I told the guy, you can call the shots and make your own schedule. Just communicate with the lead in the department. Because he's such a valuable resource for us. I want him to be able to take his vacations and do whatever else he was planning to do in retirement. But if he has a few hours each week where he could help us out, I'm game. And that's been a lifesaver over the last few weeks to have that kind of flexibility and get a person who had retired to come back here and work on a schedule that works for him.
Yeah, so actually you've touched on something else that someone in the audience asked, which is you're talking about flexibility. So can you give examples of maybe other kinds of benefits besides flexibility and obviously raising people's pay that you're offering to recruit and retain people?
One of the things in my environment, and I think other businesses sometimes have this, but manufacturing is often doing high volume manufacturing where you're doing the same thing over and over and over again. And it can be too repetitive for some people. They want more variety. I promote the fact that Wyoming Machine is a high mix, low volume manufacturer. So there's going to be lots of variety. So if there's people out there that need more variety in their work, that's been something that attracts them. But we have the pay, we offer training. Some of the training that we offer allows our employees to take classes through a local community and technical college virtually, just like we're having a virtual meeting today, where they're getting actual credit. So during their workday, they might come into a conference room and sit down at a computer like we're doing right now, and be live with a college instructor and other students in a class, working towards certificate and credentials. So I think the idea of offering those portable credentials to people so that even if they decided to leave Wyoming Machine, we're trying to retain them. But I think offering them credentials that would be recognized throughout the industry has also been a valuable tool in retaining people.
That is a great piece of advice. And I think that is where we are going to leave it. So I want to say thank you so much. It was such a pleasure talking to you. And I think that there's a lot in this conversation that will help other businesses. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Take care, Traci.
Thank you.
Audience, before we move on, let's do our audience poll. This is where you get to participate. So the poll question is, where is your business in the hiring process right now? We have actively recruiting for multiple positions, hiring for one opening, thinking about posting to grow your team, or not hiring at the moment. And it looks like, not surprisingly, most of you are actively recruiting for multiple positions. This doesn't really surprise anyone because we know that it's a bit of a struggle for everyone. So thank you. Pretty much when you add those numbers up, it's a lot of hiring. Okay, so thank you to everyone who voted in that. So now we are going to shift gears and get ready for our run session. Okay, so I'm ready to introduce Danielle Beckford. She is the VP of Employee Experience at Salary.com, and she is here because she spends all day, every day working with businesses just like yours, learning about their hiring needs and challenges, of course, and she's going to tell us what she's learned from businesses and what you can learn from them too. So, hi, Danielle.
Hi, how you doing?
Great. Thank you very much. And a reminder to the audience, if you have questions for Danielle, put them in the chat box and I will get to them a little bit later towards the end of our interview. So Danielle, first of all, just tell us about what Salary.com does for the audience members who don't know and what your role is there.
Sure. So, Salary.com, we're an HR tech company. So, specifically, we're a SaaS provider that's providing compensation market data, software, and analytics. So, what that means is we help both individuals and companies, primarily HR departments at companies, by providing them data and software to help them make smart pay decisions. So, our core initiatives here would include best practices for fair pay. We focus a lot on winning the war for talent by providing competitive salaries and gaining meaningful insights into business decisions as it relates to pay. So, a lot of recruiting, a lot of salary information. We've been in business since 1999. We have around 500 employees globally at this point, and we are headquartered in beautiful Waltham, Mass, which is where I am today. So, as Jeanette said, I'm the VP of Employee Experience at Salary. My responsibilities span all things human resource related, but my focus, as well as my career passion for the last decade, is in recruiting and retention, which I'm excited to talk to everybody about today. And I've been with Salary.com for about 3 years now.
Great. So let's talk about the recruitment and retention. What makes a great job posting?
That is an awesome question because it is the first impression. So just to start off with, the reason a lot of us or everyone is here today is we're currently in an employee market. So that means we are competing for talent. They're not chasing us, we're chasing them. So the job post being the first impression is super important. I'll give some of my tips of what I've learned, and hopefully it's helpful. So on average, the person that's looking at a job ad will probably view the ad for about 50 seconds, so less than a minute. So we don't have much time to capture their attention. I think a big difference of something people look at is the difference between a job ad and a job description. So a job description is something that you're going to use in-house once you hire someone. It's going to go in real detail of what the job is, what the expectations are. Now, in comparison, a job ad is what you're putting out into the market. So that's what candidates or potential candidates are going to be seeing. So typically 300 to 500 words is what I try to keep my job ads at. It's a really condensed version of the job description. You want to make sure you're highlighting what qualifications are an absolute must. So if you require a certain degree or certification or years of experience, you want to make sure that that's really clearly highlighted. You also want to make sure that you're highlighting the specific day in a life that someone's going to be doing so they can evaluate if that's something that they're interested and qualified for. And then lastly, a little different from a job description, you really want to, especially in this market, be highlighting benefits and what it's like to work at a company. So those would be my tips for creating a job description. Using the right
What about
title is also,
oh,
sorry, go
so go
ahead.
ahead. No, I want to hear about the
Using
title.
using the right title is huge. So you can get hung up on once you get somebody in the door, you can change the title, whatever you use in-house in your company, you can change that once someone is hired, but it's important to know when candidates are searching when it comes to search engine optimization and what the main population thinks of for a title, putting thought into how you want to go to market versus what the job title might be once the person is hired. They can be two, obviously, you don't want to have them drastically different. Quick example, my industry here is pretty specific, and we had a role for a survey analyst, and I posted that as is survey analyst, and I got about 500 applications that had to do with surveying golf courses and people that have a golf profession, and I couldn't understand why. And if you search it, that's what comes up. So we had to tweak it to figure out what are we actually looking for and how can we put it into the market where it's something more recognizable for our target audience.
So that's great advice. Where do you stand on putting a salary in the job posting?
That's a great question. I think it's for each company. They have to decide. The trend is going towards being transparent around pay. I do believe what we do here as a company at salary.com is around pay transparency. So that's our policy and our belief. Traci touched on this. Internal equity is a huge topic right now. So one of the concerns of what you have to look at is making sure that you're not posting a job for a junior level position in a department where more tenured people are not getting paid that currently in your company. So you have to make sure internal equity is a tight run ship, if you will, before you post salaries. I think in this market too, candidates are expecting it, and it does cut back on time. If the salary doesn't work for a candidate, you're not going to waste time, money, and resources reviewing a resume, speaking with them, clearing that information. So it does cut back on the timing of the recruiting process.
Great. Let's talk. So you've posted the ad, you've gotten lots of resumes, you've narrowed it down to the people you want to interview. There's a lot of ways you can go in a job interview, and so what do you recommend people are interviewing for? Is it like I said to Traci, is it about the skills of the actual job? Is it for their personality? Is it whether they're a cultural fit? Or is it whether you um, think that they can learn? So like, how should people just be thinking about conducting interviews?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to interview. My favorite technique is behavioral interviewing, so I'll talk a little bit about that. Behavioral interviewing is basically the theory that you're going to see how behavior from the past is going to predict behavior in the future for the role. So it's more of real life interviewing. You would provide examples to back up skill sets. So you would ask the question, describe a time you overcame challenges, or how do you handle criticism and feedback. So they're going to be giving real time answers of actual situations that they've been in. It also identifies transferable skill sets. Traci talks about that when she mentioned knitting as something, if you can prove you can learn something and pick up on a new skill set, that's transferable and can be part of the behavioral interviewing process. But the other kind of interview tactic would be more competency based, and you can make a mixture of both. It also depends on the role of, are you more interested in um, the behaviors behind how someone's going to come into the organization, or are you more interested in actual skill sets that are very, very necessary? And then when it comes to cultural fit, one of my favorite questions for cultural fit is the question, tell me about the best manager that you've had in your career and why was that relationship so successful? I just like that question in general, but you'll learn a lot. You'll learn what manager style will work for that person, but a lot more beyond that. You'll learn how does that person define success? What kind of culture are they looking for? Because how their manager communicated with them is the type of culture that they're looking for in an environment. It might be a culture fit or not. And it's also going to tell you their preferences and how they work with people. So I like that question.
So you've talked about we all talk about a cultural fit, and you've mentioned it a couple times, and I always struggle with this concept of cultural fit because we talk about diversity and inclusion and wanting to make sure that we build teams that are diverse and inclusive and equitable, of course. And it sometimes feels like the idea of hiring for cultural fit could have the exact opposite effect, because you might end up hiring people who are just like all of the people that you already have. So can you just talk about how you can avoid making that mistake?
Yeah, so I think that goes to a bigger topic. That first step is committing to diversity within a culture. So, remember I was in a meeting, not at this company, but another company, and we went around and defined what diversity meant on note cards, and everyone had different definitions. So, tying diversity back to the recruiting process and taking it beyond being, more of a buzzword or something we want to achieve, but we want employees to feel valued, accepted, and able to bring their whole self, if you will, to work. And while it's the right thing to do, it also ties directly to a ton of things: retention, creativity, productivity in the workspace. So if the culture is committed to diversity, then that is something that's going to fit. If you're looking for someone who's a cultural fit, being part of a diverse work culture is part of being the company. So it's going to kind of I think go hand in hand. When it comes to interviewing and recruiting specifically, I would say some specific examples. Interviewing, you want to have a dynamic interview team that showcases the company's diversity, and that can be, ethnicity, it can be gender, it can be age. I also love to have people with different levels of tenure within the company as part of the interview process. And then from more of a recruiting standpoint, um, there are different evaluations that you can do to make sure that you're posting job ads that don't have any bias within it. So that could be gender bias or language within a job ad that might speak to certain populations of people, but not another population. And then additionally, with that, getting on job boards that are focused on an emphasis on diversity. That way, you're able to build a diverse culture and get a diverse population that are coming to your job ads in the first place. And then your interview tactics, the culture that you have, is all going to back up that diversity is an important feature.
Yeah, we have a couple really good questions from the audience, so I'm actually going to jump over to some of those. This is I've experienced this so many times. It says, how much of a job interview is truly evaluating a candidate and how much of it is selling the company and the position? And has that mix changed? We talked about, Traci said before, you're kind of selling the company now to them. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, that is a huge change of when and the employee and the employer market, it's constantly changing. It will continue changing. A big difference is you are selling the company and preparing your managers or your interview team to be interviewed by the candidate is something that's super important. Depending on what times you've been in the workforce, someone coming in and interviewing you as the interviewer can come off as offensive and rude, but right now that is what's happening. So I would say I try to keep it pretty much a 50-50 mix of selling the company versus getting to know the person. You don't want to lose the fact that you do need to recruit the right talent for your company, but at the same time, it is competitive. So making sure that you're selling the company, so to speak, when you're talking to candidates is really important, and helping the management team understand what the landscape looks like right now. And that also goes to, like Traci was talking about, like time to hire. Like we have to be quick with decisions, we have to be responsive, and we have to be ready to explain to the candidates why they should work for us.
And this actually leads into a different question from the audience, which is a great question. So, what advantages do small businesses have in recruiting, and how can you convince a candidate that you as a small business are a better place for them to work than perhaps at a better, a bigger or better known company?
That's a good question. So I think my background is mostly in small businesses. So what I find is people really like to see that the work that they're doing has an actual impact on the final result. And you don't always get that at big companies. So I'll talk about things like that. I'll talk about not just being a number within the company. I'll also talk about career progression, and especially, Traci being part of a family-owned company, or our CEO is our original founder. So talking about stories like that bring home more of the family feel, talking about long tenured employees that may have started in a certain role and are now VPs of companies, and what career progression looks like. And community. People are looking for a sense of belonging, inclusion, community, and those are typically features that are found more at small businesses than they would be within larger companies.
Yeah, that I love that sense of belonging, and I think Traci mentioned flexibility as well, which is something you may not be able to get at a bigger company. We only have a couple minutes left, Danielle, and I wanted to. When I spoke to you the other day, you introduced a concept to me that I hadn't really thought about before, and it was called like cost, time, or skill set. And can you just explain that, because I think it's a unique way of looking at the hiring process?
Yes, absolutely. And I was laughing actually. You and Traci were talking a little bit about it in a real sense. So, cost, time, and skill set. So those are the three aspects that we look at when we're recruiting. If anybody has a recruiting background, they might be familiar with the phrase "purple squirrel," which just means something you don't see. If anyone's seen a purple squirrel, let me know, and I'll have to change my analogy. But So when you think about a manager coming to you and saying, okay, I want to pay somebody in the 50th percentile, which is average, and I want them to be a consultant that has very specific skill sets so they can hit the ground running. We don't want to train them. And by the way, I want them to start next Monday. You're like, great. I don't know if that's going to happen. So with those three things that you're looking at, costs, we're talking about cost to hire someone, so salary, and then time, we're talking about time to actually get them in the door, time to hire. And with skill set, we're talking about skills they're going to come in the door with and how much we're willing to invest in their training from a time and a cost perspective. So in that specific example, if we want to pay someone in the 50th percentile average pay and we want them to have really specific skill sets, what's going to have to give is probably the time. We're probably going to have to recruit for maybe 6 months, maybe a year. We're not going to be able to get someone in the door on Monday. Now, if we need somebody in the door on Monday and we want them to have those specific skill sets, we probably have to look at paying beyond the 50th percentile and getting beyond fair with pay and really competitive to maybe steal someone from another company who's already doing this. And then lastly, if we're willing to train somebody, we can look at someone with less skill sets, pay them at the 50th percentile, get them in the door on Monday, and just commit a little bit more that we're going to be able to train them and not have them hit the ground running. So it's just a balance of those three aspects and kind of identifying what is the main objective for the hire.
Yeah, so I think that's actually a great place to leave it. That's all we have time for. So I want to thank you so much, Danielle. We learned a lot. And is there any place our audience can go? They can go to salary.com, obviously, but for more information.
Yeah, I'll share. So my name is Danielle Beckford. You can find me on LinkedIn with that name and salary.com. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. I've spent a lot of time doing consulting projects with small businesses, and I would be happy to expand or share tools on anything we talked about today.
Great. We all appreciate that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care. Okay, audience. So now we are ready for our third and final segment, which is our grow section, and it is fantastic. So as I discussed with Danielle, a strong diversity and equity and inclusion is really, really important to hiring and retaining your employees. And nobody knows more about how to do that than Rosanna DeRuthi, who is the Vice President of Global Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging at LinkedIn. We were so honored that she agreed to be interviewed by Co's Features editor, Barbara Thau. Rosanna is on a mission with LinkedIn to help small businesses and, big companies too, Fortune 500 companies, create equal access to professional opportunities with workforce solutions. So let's transition now to our growth session and watch that interview with Barbara and Rosanna.
Here's a quick snapshot on the state of diversity in the U.S. business sector and the workplace today. Black professionals hold a mere 1% of the CEO positions at Fortune 500 companies, despite accounting for more than 12% of the U.S. population. And while 44 female CEOs run America's largest companies today, that number still represents a mere 8.8% of the businesses on the Fortune 500 list. Looking at issues of belonging, nearly half of LGBTQ plus professionals today believe that being out will negatively impact their job search. We have a ways to go in terms of belonging. And in the world of entrepreneurship, Black entrepreneurs believe that having access to funding will be key to growing their businesses, yet only 1 in 4 Black business owners have received funding. So as the VP of Global Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging for LinkedIn, Rosanna DeRuthi is on a mission to change these statistics. She's doing so by helping to chip away at the systemic inequities that infect the workforce, the hiring process, and career development and professional opportunities for marginalized groups. But she also knows that talk is cheap, and LinkedIn needs to be the change it wants to see in the world, as the saying goes. So that's why the professional network, which connects 740 million workers and 55 million companies, has committed, for one, to doubling the number of Black and Latino leaders in its senior ranks. Rosanna is also on a mission to help small businesses to big companies create equal access to professional opportunities with a range of solutions. We're talking about DEI training sessions on topics like unconscious bias to offering resources for entrepreneurs of color. So I am so happy to welcome Rosanna DeRuthi, and she's going to share what LinkedIn is doing within its own ranks to advance DEI and how it's helping small businesses to billion-dollar companies shape DEI strategies that generate meaningful, measurable results. Welcome, Rosanna.
Hi.
I'm so happy to be here with you.
It's a pleasure for me as well. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thank you for saying yes. So we spoke a year ago, and I would love for you have such an incredible perspective, I should say, leading the diversity efforts of the nation's biggest professional network, right? So I'm curious about the state of DEI given the socioeconomic moment that we're in, and if you had to characterize that versus 3 years ago.
Gosh, so much has happened in the last 3 years, Barbara. I think it's a great question because I think there are some significant differences. The first thing that I'll say to you is that LinkedIn has issued its second LinkedIn Jobs on the Rise report, or its 2022 report, and diversity and inclusion manager roles are the second most ranked openings that we've seen in the last year. Those in the field of diversity and inclusion are certainly saying that the role has far more visibility, more resources, more support than we've seen in the past, and certainly more influence in this last year. What we've also seen is greater leadership support for the work of diversity and inclusion. Business leaders have come to regard it as something critical, not only for the attraction and retention of talent, which during this great reshuffle becomes significant as companies seek to retain their best talent, and they recognize that this work doesn't fall on the shoulders of an individual or a team alone. So the work of diversity and inclusion isn't just the work of the diversity teams. And lastly, while we're seeing change, just as you've mentioned, we've seen improvement with diversity at the top, but there's still a ways to go. And as we think about Black and Latino talent in leadership and women in leadership, but progress is definitely happening.
What now emerges as, the key tenets of an effective diversity strategy?
It's a really good question. I think for long, a diversity strategy for many organizations has been seen as a recruiting strategy. But in fact, when we think about diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging, you're really looking at central components to an organization's environment, the culture they're creating for employees to be successful, for employees to thrive. You're looking at the way in which leaders lead inclusively, which I think is very much a skill set of the 21st century, the ability to create psychological safety and cultural humility and trust with your teams, and certainly equipping leaders to do more than just understand what bias is, but as importantly and more importantly, affirm and create a culture of inclusion for all employees to create an experience of belonging for each other is I think central to the experience. At LinkedIn, certainly we place a continued focus on an environment of belonging. It's a context associated with how each and every employee should experience, has the right to be a part of this environment and do the best work of their careers, and to have managers who are going to be supportive, to have managers who see them and give them voice. And it's a holistic element to the work that we do that really is represented in three parts. The first is how to set expectations for people, leaders, and managers around this work of diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging. The second is to ensure that they have the education and the skills to do their work effectively. And the third is to ensure accountability. Expectations, education, and accountability are central to a strategy that enables success for any organization. And certainly at LinkedIn, that's how we approach it.
So last year you said we're going to double the number, committed to double the number of Black and Latino leaders in your senior ranks, right, over a 5-year period. I'm curious about two things. Why was that initiative key from a macro point of view, and what the potential ripple effects of that might be, and also any updates on on your progress so far?
Certainly. I'll start with the progress and then talk a little bit about what's behind the scenes. So in our 2021 diversity report, we shared that we were pacing ahead of schedule on the commitment which we made at middle of 2020, shortly after we saw what was happening in the environment, and a recognition that more needed to be done to be inclusive for the Black and Latino community in tech and at LinkedIn. And since that time, what we've seen in the last year is that the growth of Black leadership, including senior individual contributors, managers, directors, senior directors, and vice presidents at LinkedIn, has grown by 35%, and for their Latino counterparts, more than 20%, 20.3% to be exact. So we're proud of the strides that we're making. If pride is even a word I'd use, I would say we're successful in leaning into this objective, but I think we recognize there's a lot of work still to be done. And, to your question, why is this important? Certainly, when we think about the work we do of creating economic opportunity for every member of the global workforce, an important part of our own values is to create economic opportunities at LinkedIn. Here in the United States, the growth of the Black and Latino population and representation and access to those economic opportunities in industries like technology haven't always been forthcoming. And so we recognize that success for an organization like ours, helping our members achieve opportunity and to realize those opportunities, comes when you not only understand and recognize the needs of that membership to have access, but you create access in your own workforce. I think what's really also very true about this is, as we continue to invest in this work, it's not just about representation on any given day. It's about the continuity and the sustained progress being made to ensure that highly qualified talent is given opportunity, whether it existed in the past or not. The reality is there's a lot of talent out there, and it's up to us to ensure that we're helping not only LinkedIn, but helping our customers and our members create the match for those opportunities. So we think we're finding a path to create that long-term sustained progress.
You have said, and LinkedIn has said, you set out to help dismantle obstacles Black entrepreneurs face. We know during the pandemic, there was a disproportionate number of formations of Black-owned businesses, for several reasons. And also the pandemic exacerbated the obstacles Black and people of color face in building businesses. I think this 58% of Black-owned businesses were facing financial hardship pre-pandemic, compared to 27% of white-owned companies. What are the core challenges Black entrepreneurs of color are facing, and how is LinkedIn addressing them meaningfully?
So you may have seen that we've released a series of surveys of the Black entrepreneurial community, the LGBT community, the Latino community as well. And really important in that is that we've seen that there are certainly trends that have emerged during COVID. As an example of that, Black professionals who already were turning toward entrepreneurship in unprecedented rates opened up more than 1.5 million businesses up through August 2021 from February 2020. That was a 38% increase in the number of Black entrepreneurs during a particularly challenging time. And what we have the opportunity to do is illuminate through the data that we discover in our surveys as a way of really helping companies grapple with the fact that they have employees as well who may have entrepreneurial aspirations. In some cases, those aspirations can be supported as a side hustle. In some cases, those aspirations can meaningfully be supported through sponsors and mentors that can help individuals build networks to better access not only the advice necessary, but also access to capital. We heard from Black business owners that one of the big challenges that they experienced as entrepreneurs was that 36% of them struggled with access to capital, 29% were carrying significant personal debt, largely signified by student loans or credit card debt to fund their own businesses, and having to financially support others outside of, living expenses. And so mentorship and network access becomes so critical. The social network and the social capital associated with individuals who are influencers, individuals who can unlock the access to capital, and most especially having access to experienced leaders who can help Black entrepreneurs foster successful growth in their businesses and growth in their communities becomes really important. 23% of Black entrepreneurs cited having a limited network as an obstacle to their career growth. And as we think about companies and their leaders often have access not only through the network connections they build at work, but through membership associations and professional associations. And so the power of networks, the power of being connected, the power of supporting each other becomes really consequential to not only growing the trust of employees, but also growing the trust of future business leaders in our communities, future vendors and partners who help our companies realize their aspirations.
So are you saying that that LinkedIn is now providing a hub for this networking, for raising funds, a formal path to these opportunities?
Part of the path that we're offering is part educational, unlocking LinkedIn learning courses that become really important for entrepreneurs to understand what's necessary so they can build their businesses. We also announced grants recently, more than $500,000 in grants to support programs and organizations that advance and accelerate Black entrepreneurship. And so working with our partners, unlocking the access to those opportunities so that they can more readily scale to people who are in the community, who are already engaged in seeking that chance. And, this is really an opportunity for all of us to lean in. It's not just the work that one organization does, but ultimately how all of us recognize and can see how the trends are indicative of aspirations in communities and what are we doing to support communities in realizing and fulfilling on their objectives.
I think it's so important that it's such a personal mission for so many people in marginalized groups, but that sometimes gets forgotten. And you and I have talked about bringing your whole self to work, right? And how important that is to be able to work okay and be happy. And so in that spirit, as a fellow woman of color and as a Latina, I was very touched, and it really resonated with me, the story that you told about yourself. People see you, she's successful, but being underestimated because of unconscious bias. And it just struck me as to how personal this work is for you, and how that really informs your work. And I'd love for you to share that with our audience, if you would be so kind to.
The course of one's life will yield these inflection points or moments when we recognize that something's not quite right. But I was in high school and I had reached my senior year in high school. I'd always been a strong student, a straight A student. I was student body president. I had skipped a couple of times. So by all indications, I had done well academically and had aspirations to go to college. But I'm always struck by the experience I had as a 15-year-old meeting with my college counselor advisor for the first time. So what colleges or universities are you thinking of? And I was bold, audacious, as you could imagine for a 15-year-old who was already student body president. And I said, well, Harvard's my first choice and Yale is my backup. And I've applied to Columbia because if I can't get into Harvard, my parents won't let me go away to school. So I had a long roster and mostly Ivy League schools. And she was a little taken aback. And I saw her sit back and look at me and says, wow, those are really great schools, but perhaps you'd like to consider some other schools. And she mentioned schools that were certainly schools that are, I would respect. They're good schools. They weren't Ivy League schools or necessarily Tier 1 schools. But what surprised me was almost this lack of expectation, a presumption that for any number of reasons she felt I should lower my expectations and that perhaps I shouldn't be applying to those schools and that my chances wouldn't be favorable. And as the story turns out, I often joke that, I have much in common with Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg because I did attend Harvard, and will forever consider myself a Harvard student. And I dropped out due to family circumstances. But I've learned potential isn't something that is based on the premise of already having achieved. Potential is often based on the premise of someone who shows promise and is doing well has the ability to do better and greater. And so it has given me a bit of a fuel in the belly, so to speak. It's inspired me to think about the ways in which we as leaders sometimes presume that individuals aren't equipped. And yet the difference between being ready is an opportunity. The difference between fulfilling on that opportunity is having the sponsorship, the endorsement, the mentor, or someone who supports you and believes wholeheartedly in you. And while we all make mistakes as human beings, the importance of recognizing that individuals are never their circumstances. Whether that individual comes from a wildly successful family, or that individual doesn't have means and may even be homeless, I think the potential of each and every individual has the promise of being realized. And the big difference can be that one leader, and hopefully that's one leader who's listening in on this conversation, to look up and see someone for who they can be and not just the circumstances they may be in, based on the color of their skin, based on socioeconomic background, based on any of the number of things that we may, in our own bias, judge as limiting the opportunity for that individual.
What is one key thing that entrepreneurs can do to tackle the DEI challenges that they face?
Yeah, so we know that, for example, Black entrepreneurs often face barriers to growing their businesses, including dealing with microaggressions or having access to capital and building supportive networks. So early on, seek out an entrepreneurship group or network to gain the skills needed to grow as an entrepreneur. Create access for a safe community that you can lean on for help and foster growth. I think one of the great things about the moment that we're in is that whether it's through a meetup, whether it's through connections you're making on LinkedIn, whether it's through other elements of social media and social enabled contacts, communities are growing, and the doors are open for individuals to invite themselves in if they look up and they look around. I think it's also really important for corporations to extend that opportunity, whether it's through education. Many leaders and organizations sit on corporate boards or may have access to advising startups. How do you help individuals in your own organization? Some of them may be involved with your employee resource groups. How might you stand up a conversation, a fireside chat, or maybe a gathering to just talk about, what it's like to be an entrepreneur? What are the challenges entrepreneurs face? What are some of the things you need to know so that you can be successful when you strike out on your own?
Thank you so much for this. This is delightful.
Barbara, it's such a pleasure. Keep doing the great work as well. Always share insights and perspectives that we're gaining from this work. LinkedIn is committed to creating economic opportunity for every member of the global workforce. I recognize that in my work of diversity, inclusion, and belonging, we help ensure that there's access to those opportunities. So I appreciate your being a partner in these conversations.
That was a fantastic interview. Thank you both to Barbara and Rosanna. And actually, thanks to all our guests. Now, don't hang up yet, audience, because I have just a couple more things to say, but I will get you out of here soon. So thank you to Traci, Danielle, and Rosanna for everything today. I thought this was a great episode. And of course, thank you to Salary.com, our sponsor today, and our series sponsors, Dell, FedEx, Iron Mountain, MetLife, and Oracle NetSuite. You can always check out Co for more resources. We do a ton of stories on hiring and retention, so please go to growwithco.com. And this is what I wanted to make sure I got in. The deadline is approaching for applying for our Dream Big Awards. The deadline is July 8th. We are still looking for applications. You can go there on Co it's uschamber.com/co dream big, and we will send you that link in the email after this event. We're still looking for applications in a number of categories: veteran-owned, women-owned, green businesses especially, so please apply. Our next episode of Start, Run, Grow will be on August 11th, when we will be talking about staying connected in this crazy hybrid world that we're all working in now. Thanks for everything, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.